Thank you, Sean and Piggy. This morning I want us to go back to the book of Philippians, and we've finally gotten to the final chapter. I want to start with a question, though. And it would be interesting if we had the ability to find out how long it took you to come up with an answer in your mind for this question. I would be really curious. When in your entire life do you remember being the most discouraged? Now, when I thought about that question, it was an easy one for me. That moment popped in my head very quickly. It would be interesting to know from you if that's the case or not. When we get to chapter 4 in the book of Philippians, I don't know, I always am hesitant to say, this is my favorite this or that. Philippians chapter 4 is possibly my most favorite chapter in all of the New Testament. But not the section that we're going to study this morning. It's the section that follows. And yet, when I looked at the first few verses of Philippians 4, I realized that there's a whole lot more than I ever stopped to give thought to. It's a topic of encouragement. When I asked Mark to read from Isaiah chapter 41, that verse 10, "Fear not, for I am with you. Be not dismayed, for I am your God. I will strengthen you. Yes, I will help you. I will uphold you with my righteous right hand." The most difficult day of your life. And we talked recently about Gretchen had a difficult day not long ago. She got hit with the double whammy of relatives encountering physical problems. That verse, I think that verse may be one that we ought to transcribe and put it on a piece of paper and stick it on our mirror, or put it in the front of our Bible, or keep it someplace where we can come back and revisit that when we need to be encouraged. It's easy for me to get discouraged when things don't go as well as I would like for them to. And I try to figure out, what can I do to fix that? Bottom line is, sometimes that's the only thing that will fix it. And we have to remember that. And I would suggest to you that what we learn from the book of Philippians is that you and I have a duty to encourage. We talk about not forsaking the assembling of ourselves together as the manner of some is, but so much the more as you see the day approaching. Encourage one another unto love and to good works. That is an encouragement. We have a responsibility. We have a duty to do that. And I think what you'd have to decide is, how well do you do it? Now, the other question that popped into my mind as I was prepping this is, no doubt, if I were to ask you, who more than anybody else that you've ever encountered in your life is the person who you would describe as being the greatest encourager you've ever met? I narrowed it down to two. And both of them were former bosses. I felt badly after I did that so quickly, because I got to thinking that, there were so many other people who encouraged me. And that maybe I really haven't given them the due respect for the difference that they have made in my life. One of the persons who came to mind was somebody that I said to myself, that person has reached an age where they're not going to be around very long. And I need to tell them. And I did. And they're gone. And I'm glad I did. Who is it that is that influence in your life, and can you take their place? Can you do that? Here's the verses I want us to look at. Therefore, my beloved and longed for brethren, my joy and crown, so stand fast in the Lord, beloved. I implore Euodia and I implore Syntyche to be of the same mind in the Lord, and I urge you also, true companion, help these women who labored with me in the gospel, with Clement also, and the rest of my fellow workers whose names are in the book of life. A couple of points here that we're not going to talk about. Maybe we should. Maybe they're more important. I implore Euodia and I implore Syntyche to be of the same mind. We don't know who these two ladies are. What we do know, though, is apparently there's a difference of opinion between them. They're not of one mind. They're not together. And then he says, and I urge you also, true companion, to help these women. Apparently, these were women who had been faithful workers in the gospel that he wants to get together on the same page. And I'm urging true companions to help with this. He mentions Clement. We don't know who Clement is. Now, there was one really famous Clement who was a leader in Rome and has written letters that have been preserved to the church at Rome. But Clement was a common name in their society, so we don't know if that was who this is or not. And that's everything we have. But what we do know is that Euodia, Syntyche, Clement, and the rest of my fellow laborers, they were laborers with him. They were somebody that he felt enough toward, he wanted to encourage them to do that. Now, I want us to think about what it says here, because this is going to be sort of the application verse right at the beginning. 2 Timothy 4, Paul, talking to the young preacher, Timothy, says, preach the word, be ready in season, out of season, convince, your translation may say, reprove, rebuke, exhort with all long-suffering and teaching. Now, when you look at those words, when you look at those descriptors, it's kind of interesting because they appear to be in reverse order. Why is teaching last? Teaching's where they would have stood. That's where the starting point. And then he says, with that teaching, convince and rebuke and exhort. And so there are lots of methods included here for communicating. And if you and I are going to be encouragers, we can learn something about what he says. He says that we need to patiently teach and we need to encourage. And the entire letter of Philippians falls under these two things. Be patient. Don't get out of hand. And encourage them. He says, yes, reprove and rebuke. And those seem like harsh terms. Those seem like things that these are the toe stompers, if you will. Patiently teach, convince them, rebuke them, exhort them with all long suffering. Do all of this with teaching and love and compassion. Okay? That's the context for what he told the preacher Timothy about how to communicate. And Jesus used all those forms in his life. We have examples of every one of those. Now, when I put up there this, Barnabas was known as the son of encouragement. Do we know why? Well, he was born Joseph. He was a Levite from Cyprus, cousin to John Mark. Barnabas was the name that the apostles gave him because he was so well known for how often he encouraged other people that they decided that the name Barnabas, which is translated son of encouragement, should be his name instead of Joseph, the one that he was given. And we have examples of that. He was encouraging the church in Jerusalem. He encouraged new believers in Antioch. He was the one who brought Paul to Antioch. He accompanied Paul in his first journey. He took Mark as a mentee when Paul refused to work with him anymore. He was an encourager. He was a great example. Someone has said that Barnabas wasn't the son of encouragement. He was encouragement in action. And he didn't just carry the name. He did it. And he became known for it. But what does it mean? And it's fascinating. I thought I knew until I started really looking at all of the different elements that are included in the definition of the word encourage. It's things like to call near, to invite, to beg, to entreat, to beseech. Tom said this morning that he wants to study the English language more because it's such a beautiful language. I don't think I agree with him. I don't think it's a beautiful language. I think that maybe only second to Chinese, it may be the most confusing language that's ever existed. Because we can take one word and we can come up with 18 different things that that word means, and then next year we'll add 2 new ones. You don't believe it? Our wife's middle name is Gay. It means to console, to encourage, to strengthen by consolation. And all I did was to take Strong's dictionary, Thayer's dictionary, and just pull up the word encouragement and look at all of the different words that they had to try to piece together to come up with some way to define what it means to encourage. And so it means all of those things, including comforting and encouraging and strengthening. And just cherry picking the terms. Thayer says it's used to praise, to provoke good. It's the opposite of a negative mindset. That you're begging them, you're calling them to come near to you. That's what you're doing when you're encouraging them. When somebody is in their lowest form, their lowest mindset, that's what they need. And it's a pretty good list of things to think about how you can make a difference. Not long ago, I don't remember if it was maybe on Wednesday night or if it was here, we talked about what do you say when you go to a funeral. We all kind of decided that we really don't know what to say. If we're going to encourage somebody, this is what we need to be doing. That's how we need to approach it. And in the Philippian letter, several things that we've already noticed, we've already talked about. In chapter 1, he said, look, all of this stuff that's happening to me, I'm writing from exile, and all of the things that has happened. Don't worry about those things. Don't be anxious. Paul said, I'm doing fine, and I'm going to be fine. He chastises them and says, don't worry about me. And later he says that you need to be careful about letting your adversaries overwhelm you. Don't be fearful of them. Stay steadfast. Stay with who you are, with what you know, and what you do. In chapter 2, he begs them to be unified. Let you all be of one mindset. It's an interesting word, mindset. Set your minds. And when you do, all of you set them the same way. And that's how we strengthen each other in the process of doing so. And then what did he say? Let this little Christian light of yours shine. Shine as lights in the world. Don't be known for complaining and disputing. Boy, are we in a perfect time to complain and dispute. We have been handed the keys of complaining. He said, don't do it. That's what he addressed in chapter 2. We talked recently about how he says this is a race and we need to run because we want to obtain and we want to have a victory and we want to get a reward. And now he's saying, look, these 2 ladies, he didn't tell us what the issue is, but these 2 ladies need to get together. They need to be of one mind. And then later on, we haven't gotten there yet, but he said, look, there are ways to deal with all of this stuff in your life that gives you trouble. And so these are the issues he's addressing. Think about what those say. In every instance, He's trying to find a way to be encouraging. He's trying to get them all together. That every negative thing that he talks about in the letter to the Philippians, he turns into a positive. And rather than chastising them and condemning them, he says, we don't have to have this. We can be better than this. And that everything's going to be fine. What was his attitude? Well, verse 1, therefore, my brethren, dearly beloved and longed for, my joy and crown, stand fast in the Lord, my dearly beloved. This wasn't fake. What was his attitude? He wasn't putting on. He really loves these people. He's not trying to get their votes. He really does love them. He's not trying to get them over onto his side. He's saying, my heart is filled for you. People we love and respect, we can approach honestly. We can say things to them that may even be reproving and rebuking. Maybe they're just encouraging. But we can do it because they know we love them and they love us. He says, you are my joy and crown. Stand fast. Dearly beloved. When you think about those phrases, brethren, dearly beloved, my longed for, he says that you should beseech and entreat. There's those encouragement terms that we found as part of the definition. If you go back and you reread Philippians chapter 1, especially verses 3 through 11, that introduces the whole book of Philippians, it tells us where he's going. It tells us what his heart is. Now, Tom teaching about 1st and 2nd Corinthians has made the point several times, and I think accurately so, that there is a tone shift between 1 Corinthians and 2 Corinthians. And you can hear that tone shift as you read those two. And I don't know that I would say that the tone was harsh in 1 Corinthians. There were some fairly strong reproofs, some rebukes of the church in 1 Corinthians. 2 Corinthians, much less. Think about the language in Philippians. It's encouraging, it's loving, it's compassionate. He wants them to know how much he loves them. It was full of joy as he tried to tell them. Now, I teach this course for Lipson. Communication strategies. There's all kinds of stuff that could be in there. Most of it is not here. The one thing that is the importance in communicating about trying to understand who it is you're communicating to. And the first place it has to start is by listening. And I've said this before, and I'd love to do a class on it at some point. We are terrible listeners. On good days, we're not good listeners. On bad days, we're not listening at all. And if we were, we would be different. And what we have to do is we think about our audiences, that we have to listen to them. We have to encourage them. We have to beseech them. We have to plead with them as a communication strategy to get them where we want them to be. And we need to sometimes be direct, and we sometimes need to be stern. Paul is using this letter to say, hey, I want to inspire, I want to encourage. Not going to overly rebuke you. Hey, ladies, get together on the same page. You're a fellow worker. That's pretty strong language in Philippians. It wouldn't even be noticed in 1 Corinthians. We need to inspire others about what the long-term benefit will be when we figure out how to be good encouragers of others. I have been watching one of those serial shows where a man's son had basically an epileptic seizure, hard word to say, and he accidentally drove his car into a kid on a motorcycle, and that kid was killed. And that kid's father is the mob boss. And throughout the whole show, the father is trying to figure out how to encourage his son over what had happened. Lisa and I were awakened several years ago. I don't even know it was late. Our son had been out of town in his Z28 Camaro, and the phone rang, and took the call, and it was from my son, and he was crying, and it got my attention in a big hurry. And I was having a hard time even understanding what he was saying, but at that hour when they call and they're crying, I'm trying to react and understand what happened. And Lisa's listening to my end of the conversation. And she is scared to death. And I look over and she is getting up and getting dressed. We didn't know exactly what had happened, but we knew we had to go. We had to be there. We had to be there immediately. Because our not-so-baby boy needed help. And no matter what he had done, at that moment, I didn't care. I wanted to know that he was okay, and I wanted to know that he was going to be okay. But that was our son. What about the other people in this room? When they go through this stuff, you know, when I read the text about Ellis Jarrett, my heart fell into my stomach, because they had been thinking all along that the surgery had worked and he was going to be fine and he was going to be wonderful, and now that's not the case. When I got the message about Carrie Hyde in Hawaii, my heart fell in my stomach. And about Daryl and his stroke. They weren't my child, but they're part of my family. And you and I have to figure out, what ability do you have to be one of the greatest encouragers of all time? I don't mean to embarrass her, but this little lady over here is one of the most kind, timid, not very vocal people I know. And she may be one of the greatest encouragers of my life I've ever known. Because she does it by example. She's a daughter of encouragement. I don't know what the female version of Barnabas is, but I would tack that onto her if I knew how to do that. We can do this. We can encourage each other. We can be there for each other, and we need to keep practicing this skill. Jeff made a comment in Bible class this morning. How do you compare Paul to Jesus? And I think summarizing what Jeff said is, nobody can compare to Jesus. He was a human form of God, and therefore nobody compares to him. And tell what we can do, though. We can listen to him, and we can model him. Because here's what he said. Come unto me, all you that labor and are heavy laden, I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you, learn of me. I'm meek and lowly in heart, and you will find rest unto your souls. For my yoke is easy, and my burden is light. You remember what Isaiah said? Fear not, for I am with you. Be not dismayed. I am your God. I will strengthen you. Yes, I will help you. I will uphold you with my righteous hand. Christ did all the heavy lifting. And He's lifted our burdens by what He did. This morning we're going to sing a song as a means of encouragement. you're not a Christian, we're ready to change that today. And for the rest of us, there are days when I'm not very good at this stuff. Maybe more than I care to think about. And as you've probably figured out, I've reached an age where I cry at Hallmark commercials. Okay, so and yet at the same time, there are many, many, many things that I need to be more compassionate about. And I need to find a way to raise the wings and pull the chicks in under. And some days I need you to do that with me. And I have an obligation to be there to do that for you. It is part of our family at Beech Grove. If we can help you this morning, we're going to sing a song as a means of encouragement for you. And I want the words of this next song to be that encouragement. When you think about what Christ has done. Let us all stand and sing together.